Hi everyone, welcome back to e-learning bridge. I hope you guys are doing good and staying safe. I'm back again with my new video. So before moving forward, यार आप लोगों ने जो भर भर के प्यार दिखाया है उसकी वजह से we are about to hit 1K subscribers very soon.
मस्त जोक मारा रे या हंस रे हलकट हंस
So thank you very much for that. एंड जो भी यार नए हो चैनल पे फटाफट सब्सक्राइब कर दो बिकॉज इट गिव्स मी मोटिवेशन दैट यप आई एम डूइंग समथिंग फॉर द कम्युनिटी.
चल झूठा.
So yeah, subscribe kar do. This session is basically a part 2 of our previous session with Alpesh, which was about designing scalable systems. So if you haven't watched the video yet, then go and check out that video. In this session, Alpesh has talked about web services, REST APIs, SOAP APIs, monolithic and microservice architecture, what is the difference between these two, and what is non-blocking and blocking IOs. So watch this video till the end because this session is going to clear your doubts about the web services. So without wasting time, let's jump on to the session. So in previous session, you talked about system designing. I think we should also talk about these web architectures like web services and microservices. So this session is basically will be around web services and microservices. So let's jump on to our questionnaire. So my first question to you is like, what are web services?
Okay, so very generic question, but very important to answer. It becomes really difficult for people to understand the difference between web services and the desktop applications. So desktop applications are something like which are installed on the desktop, and people start using the application. And web services are basically something that communicates over the network, and some other application is solving the problem for you and giving the results back to you. Right?
Yeah.
So web services are mostly comprised of a web server and an application which actually performs the logic. Right? Now,
Okay.
What is a web server? If you ask, then web service. So basically, if there is a web application, then the client has to communicate to a server application, right? Now,
Yeah.
for communication itself, there are a lot of protocols that have to, be implemented. For example, the TCP/IP protocol, and then there is the HTTP protocol, right?
Right.
There might be the FTP protocol. There are lots of SMTP, like the list goes on. There are a lot of protocols that have to be implemented, right?
अरे मुझे चक्कर आने लग गया अब.
So it was really recognized that there has to be a need of something which takes care of all the protocols, and
Okay.
people only software developers only focus on the business logic, and they do not keep implementing the protocol itself every time before developing any web applications, and hence the concept of web servers came in. So web servers are also kind of an application, right? But an application that somebody has written for you, and it takes care of all the protocols that are happening. So basically, the web server itself, handles the connection making, the TCP connection making, and then whatever HTTP message is coming up, interpreting that message and calling your application's specific method that needs to be called basis that request. So all this logic is written in the web server. If web servers were not there, you might be writing those logics, right?
Right.
So, I mean, a lot of people get confused that what is Tomcat? What is it doing for me? Why do I have to install my war file or jar file in a Tomcat? And why do I have to do this? And they tend to, normally just ignore the fact that they're installing the application on the Tomcat. They just say that, okay, I have to implement this business logic. I do that. The rest Tomcat will take care of. So that rest that Tomcat is taking care of, or the web server is taking care of, is basically interpreting the protocol and calling specific methods that you have implemented, depending on the requests.
So let's move on to the next question. So what are the differences between monolithic, SOA, and microservice architectures?
Okay, so I would say SOA is kind of a outdated term now, although a lot of companies are still using it for legacy purposes because they have not upgraded their services yet, or maybe their services are too complicated now to migrate to some other architecture, so they're continuing with SOA. But I would again try to answer it in a historical kind of pathway. So as I said in the last session also, that most of the applications were initially built in monolithic kind of architecture, wherein there was an application, it used to take requests, and it used to make some database calls, and it used to make some third-party calls maybe, and present a response. And then people used to replicate this application logic on 5 to 6 nodes and put a load balancer on top, and life was really easy for them. But as soon as the number of requests grew, some applications like Facebook came in, Gmail, Facebook, wherein the number of requests was really high.
Yeah.
This kind of architecture, either what you do is you replicate the application on a lot of nodes, like thousands or millions of nodes, but then
Right.
it became very it was not cost effective. So there was a need of changing the architecture to cater to these increased volume of requests. There was another problem. Problem is that in a monolithic kind of application, if there is a issue in the application, or if one component of the application fails or crashes, it crashes the entire application.
Right.
Right. So that was another problem with such kind of architecture. So in order to cater these requirements, a new concept of SOA came in. SOA is basically service-oriented architecture.
Okay.
So yeah. So what they did was they used to break the logic into different services, right? And then they used to communicate among themselves.
Okay.
Right? But again, at that time, the database was still same. So all the applications would still be, all the services would still be accessing the same database, and they would be communicating over a something called ESB, I guess. I haven't worked in that, but they used to communicate over ESBs.
Okay.
Some service bus, something. Right. So that was the kind of architecture that came in, and it solved a lot of problems. Like, for example, if one application went down, one service went down, it did not impact the other services. Right.
Okay.
But there were still problems in that architecture. And again, SOA was more of a theoretical term, and people used to implement SOA applications according to their own understanding of SOA, right? So what services you are breaking into, how many services you are breaking into, right? Those things were still implementation specific. And SOA was just a theoretical term, and there was no single, unified definition of how to, divide the application into services. That was totally implementation specific. But then again, the need for even microservices came in, right? So people said that even still the services themselves are really big, and within a service also, if there is a failure, the entire service goes down, right?
Okay.
And
Right.
second problem was the databases. Database was still single, right? So microservices came in, and microservices is basically dividing your services even to a micro level, right? So
Right.
most of the microservices are basically CRUD kind of a microservice, wherein it just takes a request, does a very unified kind of atomic kind of an operation, and gives the results back. And it does not care about anything outside the world, right? Outside its own world, right?
Okay.
So that's what a microservice is. A microservice is basically, if let's say there is an authentication service, let's say, right? So all authentication service does is, let's say it takes a username and password, checks it to the database, and says whether it is valid or not, and gives functionality to add a new username and password. That's it.
Okay.
Right? It does not care where it is being used, why it is being used, whether the people using it are using it properly or not. Right? Let's say it has given a response that it is invalid user, and still people are allowing the user in. It does not care.
Yeah.
So a microservice is a very small logic which is complete in itself and handles its own database. That's it.
Okay.
Right? And now if you put together all these lot of microservices together and work them, combine them through API calling, they tend to make a bigger logic complete.
Okay.
So that's how microservices work together, and mostly they are so as SOA, the communication protocol was over ESBs. In microservices, it is through REST APIs mostly, and now also other protocols are coming up like gRPC, which is Google RPC, so which make the communication even faster between microservices.
Okay. So my next question to you is like, what are RESTful APIs and its features?
Okay. So RESTful APIs are basically you can think of them as a single REST API request. That's it, right?
Okay.
So RESTful APIs are normally again a specification. It's not something that a framework has implemented it, or there are a lot of vendors which are giving RESTful APIs. It's a concept that has been implemented by web servers.
Okay.
Mostly web servers and browsers, right? So think of it this way. Let's say you have two nodes, a client and a server, right? And the client is making some requests to the server, and server is responding back.
Okay.
Right? So this was done through HTTP, right?
Mhm.
Now what people used to do is that, you know, the kind of URLs that they used to make and body and all those things were getting really out of hands. People used to really misuse this kind of protocol handling, right?
Yeah.
So a new kind of specification came in which said that, okay, if you have to make a call to a server, there are some rules or conventions that you should follow,
Yeah.
right? So for example, if you're, let's say, if you consider a user for a auth service, let's say, a user is an entity, right?
Okay. Right.
So if you want to make a user, what you do is you make a post HTTP call with all the details of the user in a JSON format.
Yeah.
So if you follow this convention, then your API call becomes a RESTful API call.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the entire concept of REST. And just as I said about post, similarly, if you want to get some information from the server, then you just give the ID of the user, and they also have conventions for the URL. So the REST is basically all about conventions.
Okay.
So if you want to get something, then you should have this kind of URL / ID, and you should be exchanging information in JSON format. Why JSON format? Because, you know, JSON is compatible with JavaScript object directly.
Okay.
So JSON became a, you know, standard. Otherwise, earlier people used to, you know, use XML, or
Yeah.
even sometimes people used to, you know, even give CSVs sometimes. So these were, I mean, you know, it is you know, possible to implement the same logic in XML and CSVs also, but again, it depends on how complex it becomes, you know,
Yeah.
for
Right.
maintenance. So if you're using JSON, then it becomes really easy to maintain the code, and hence it became a convention.
Okay. So my next question to you is like, what is the difference between REST and SOAP APIs?
Okay, so another thing that people think is that, you know, SOAP and REST are two totally different things working on a totally different technological stack, right? But actually they are not, right? Both of them are working on top of HTTP protocol, right? As I said, there is a convention that you're following in REST, right? Similarly, there was a convention that you were following in SOAP. So SOAP came in before REST, and there were some problems with SOAP implementation, and hence the RESTful APIs came in. So what SOAP said was that, you know, you should make all the HTTP requests in an XML format, right? So the XML was its de facto format, and there were some really cool frameworks which were developed to support SOAP kind of infrastructure, right? So there were some web server frameworks, application frameworks, which used to, you know, give you flexibility to, you know, they would parse the XML file for you and create objects for you. So those kind of frameworks popped up after the SOAP specification came in, right?
Okay.
But obviously there were problems with SOAP that, you know, XML itself is a very bulky format. So although there were frameworks, but the network communication was very heavy, and
Okay.
hence the JSON format came in. And also XML parsing was very heavy operation. So
Okay.
because of those things, people said that, you know, the internet community came up with the RESTful kind of application convention. So as I said, these are both conventions, and both of them are working on HTTP protocol, and both of them are solving the purpose of a client making a request to a server and server responding it back.
Okay.
So what should be the URL pattern? What should be the body pattern? What should be the format? These are only specifications for that.
Okay. So my next question to you is like why containers are used in microservices?
Okay. Uh, Another really new term that has come up, and people are really, you know, confused about what containers are. They're just reading the entire internet to, you know, get
Yeah.
an idea about what containers are. But again, it has a brief history. Although it is a new term, but it has a brief history. And the entire concept of containers started when, you know, the need of microservices and the auto scaling came up.
Okay.
Auto scaling means basically, as and when your number of requests are increasing, you need to, you know, start a new node, right? So
Okay.
let's say if you have 5 nodes running your application and handling them in a balanced way, in a round robin way, but still the number of requests are so high that these 5 nodes are not able to respond to all the requests in, you know, appreciable amount of latency. Then
Okay.
what you would do is you would start a new instance, or maybe start a new node of your application, so that now the load is even more distributed, right? So
Okay.
initially, when this kind of load balancing was implemented, what they would do is they would, in a cloud kind of infrastructure, they would start a new node. So a new node was sanctioned from the hardware. Then uh, the, the OS was installed. Then all the required libraries was installed.
Yeah.
Then the application was installed, and then the application was started. So it took a lot of time,
Yeah.
right? It took a lot of time to start a new node. So instead, what the containers-based architecture did was, it kind of had all the libraries and OS and everything uh, ready-made in an image, right?
Okay.
And you would just spin that image on a disk, on a hardware, and your application was up,
Okay.
right? So the time to deploy an application became considerably small, right?
Exactly.
So that's why the concept of containers came, and even more advanced containers came in, wherein they used to use the same kernel as their host. So
Okay.
even you don't need the kernel inside your image. Kernel was used, the host that was being used for deploying the container, that kernel itself would be used, and you would only add some libraries, and your application is ready to go.
Okay. Let's move on to the next question that is related to web servers. So what is blocking and non-blocking IO, and what are its impact on web servers?
Okay, very good question. Something that it's very important to understand this blocking, non-blocking IO from performance perspective.
Okay.
So what I have seen is that mostly applications that are being implemented right now, even now, are mostly done in blocking IO, right?
Okay.
And non-blocking IO really solves a lot of problems for you, and it makes the application asynchronous. Although it does come up with some problems with itself, but performance-wise, it's far better. And I wouldn't say performance-wise exactly. I would say on the same resources, it would perform better. Or
Okay.
you can say to get X performance, it requires less number of resources. Either way, right?
Okay.
So it's cost effective in that sense. So basically, what the difference between blocking and non-blocking IO is, basically if you get uh, a request, and in that request, if you're doing some database call or a API call for any IO, right?
Okay.
In that case, the underlying difference is, are you blocking the thread or not, right?
Okay.
Are you blocking the thread? Now, what people generally misunderstand is, they would open a new thread and they would
Mm-hmm.
say, no, I'm not blocking the thread anymore, right?
Oh, oh.
I'm not
Okay.
blocking the main thread anymore. But the problem is that the new thread that you've opened is still blocked,
Right.
right? So the point is not to block or not block the main thread. The point is, are you blocking any thread, right? So that is one
Okay.
of the misconceptions that people have. Although not blocking the main thread does solve a lot of problems, right? So if you have, let's say, 200 Tomcat threads running, and your web server thread running, and if a request comes in and you open a new thread, then your main thread is released and you can do other operations. Let's say if you have 3 API calls, and you can open one thread for each, and let them be called parallelly, and at the end you wait for all the 3 results to come, right?
Yeah.
So it does not block the main thread, but it still blocks the new threads that you have opened, and those new threads are also from the thread pool of the Tomcats itself. They're not sanctioned outside this pool. Hence, you're blocking some thread. Now the problem is, why are they blocked? They are blocked because of the IO calls that are being made and the libraries that are making those calls. So,
Okay.
for example, if you are making an API call through, let's say, HTTP client, Apache HTTP client, or let's say through Spring REST API, then those libraries tend to block the thread that they are called on, right?
Okay.
And in most of the libraries, these are blocking calls. However, some new libraries have come up which are non-blocking, and they release the thread that is that was used to call those APIs.
Okay.
Right? So there is a callback kind of a mechanism. So what they do is, when you call an API, they take the request and then they release the thread, right? Now once the response has come, the API response has come, at that time there is an event loop going on. There is one single thread which is always busy, right? Which keeps on checking whether a response has come or not. So let's say if
Okay.
you had fired 5 API calls, then all the five objects that have been created, it keeps checking whether a response has come or not. So there is a loop going on.
Yeah.
And if a response has come, it sanctions a new thread for processing the response only, not for IO wait. So that
Okay.
is the difference between blocking and non-blocking. And the impact it has on the second question that you asked was whether it has impact on web servers or not. Yes, it definitely has. And I've seen actually applications crashing because of this problem. And although it was not exactly because of non-blocking IO, the applications that normally crash are because they are blocking the main thread, right? So
Yeah.
you should never block the main thread. And second problem that is normally ignored, and it is really, I mean, it should never be ignored, is you should always have timeouts.
Yeah.
If you do not have timeouts, your threads will be blocked for a longer period of time, and there will definitely be a time when all the threads are choked and application will start throwing 502 bad gateway kind of errors. So
Yeah.
kind of it becomes unavailable. So yeah, so blocking and non-blocking should be avoided, and in IO context, you should use non-blocking IO wherever it is possible. In some of the databases, RDBMS like MySQL, it is not possible yet. So there are no libraries which are making non-blocking calls. But at least for API calling, you can use libraries which are giving non-blocking kind of functionality.
Okay, Alpesh. I mean, that sounds really good to know about these fundamental things about the API callings. And thanks for this session on web and microservices. I think this is going to be really useful for the newcomers actually, because they just keep on Googling and try this stuff. I think these concepts will be really useful for them. Thanks for this session, Alpesh.
So that's it for today's session, guys. I hope you guys liked this session with Alpesh again on web and microservices. And if you guys liked it, then like, share and subscribe the channel and put your topics of interest जिस पे आप चाहते हो कि मैं नेक्स्ट वीडियो बनाऊं अपनी. एंड इफ एनीबडी इज इंटरेस्टेड टू गिव अ टेक टॉक on our channel, then please reach out to us. We would be really happy to have you on our channel. Till then, stay safe, stay home guys, and keep following eLearning Bridge on social media for daily updates and feeds. Stay tuned for our next video.